All right, everyone, welcome. I am Gary Huggins, Executive Director of the Direct Selling Education Foundation. Very happy to have you with us for the next in our DSEF Insights and DSA Engage series. This is the first installment of DSEF's three-part customer series. We're going to focus on customer acquisition and retention and try to share some strategies throughout that you can implement today and also give you the opportunity to learn from your colleagues in the industry. And in that spirit, we have a great panel today of executives that are going to cover some important topics. We'll talk about the latest trends in customer acquisition and retention. That will include improving the shopping experience, identifying customer channel preferences, certainly a challenge, implementing loyalty programs, segmenting your audience, and using analytics effectively throughout the whole process. We'll also discuss some of the common customer acquisition challenges that are out there and how to really incentivize your field to meet those effectively. So just please join me in welcoming our panelists. We've got a couple of great folks to talk with today. First, let me introduce Gordon Hester, who's been involved in direct selling for almost 30 years. And for over a decade, he's worked as an industry consultant with various companies and joined Zurvita as Chief Innovation Officer in 2020. Gordon is also the author of a great book. It's called Positioned Right: The Forces Shaping the Future of Direct Selling and Network Marketing. I urge you all to get and read that great book. It's fantastic. He is also the co-founder of a full stack technology development company that works with over 20, I think it is at this point, direct selling and network marketing companies. He also serves, close to our heart, on the DSEF Board of Directors and our Academic Advisory Council, working very closely as an industry liaison and guide to our academics as they work to support the direct selling channel. He's been a great friend and significant contributor to the foundation's work for several years. So Gordon, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction.
Also very happy to have Roxana Epps, who is Young Living's Director of Integrated Marketing. She's an agile leader and strategist and tactician in sales and marketing. We very much appreciate her sharing her expertise in those areas. It's a tongue twister for me there. With us today, she's worked for global companies inside and outside the channel, and I think that perspective is always really important as we have these conversations. You know, how are the other folks doing it as well? She's directed innovative programs at various companies that have significantly impacted customer retention, which we really want to focus on today, and is known for leading with her heart and with a growth mindset. So Roxana, we're really happy to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Gary.
And before I hand it off to Gordon and Roxana, a couple things for our audience. First, kind of a surprise here that I want to preview. We'll talk more about it at the end. But we want to encourage you to join us at 2 p.m., not long after our session ends on Facebook Live. We'll put the address in the chat and we'll give you a slide at the end with the address. But Joe Mariano was going to make a very special announcement about the launch of the Direct Selling Journal. And it's a great story to tell there. So we encourage you all to join us. It's going to be, I think, a really cool announcement and something that you'll be excited about. Lastly, before I hand it over to Gordon and Roxana to take us through, we want to make this webinar, as always, as interactive as possible as you're listening to the conversation. In fact, Gordon and Roxana will invite you to use the chat function. We want you to share your own specific challenges and company focus. We want to hear from you and what you're really focused on. This is going to help Gordon and Roxana to focus their remarks on what you care about the most, certainly, but also it's going to maximize the benefit for all of our participants and your colleagues to look at and see and learn from what we're all doing. And then finally, we're going to have time for questions at the end. And we encourage you to use the Q&A function as we're going. Bring those questions to us as we're going through that Q&A function. And I will do my best to get those to Gordon and Roxana so they can talk with us through what's really on your mind as well. So with that, Gordon and Roxana, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Gary. I really appreciate it. Let me turn the screen on here. So First of all, thank all of you for taking the time to tune in to the webinar today. I think it's safe to say that this is a topic that probably is important to everybody on this call. And if anything, it is growing in importance. It is certainly a pleasure to do it with Roxana. We recently met and discussed her focus on really the customer retention piece of things. And we spent an hour on our first call, and I was like, my gosh, I got to get her talking to more people. She has so much amazing knowledge because on my world, I live a lot in strategy, but she's on the execution piece, and those two worlds have to obviously work together. So as I said, customer acquisition and retention are not new subjects. I think what has evolved is the prioritization of the distribution channel over the opportunity. And I saw that shift happening as a big part of my book in 2016, ultimately understanding that the foundation was really built around customers, especially end consumers. And if we do that, the opportunity works much better. So, we have traditionally had a lot of distributors as customers, and I believe they're customers too. But equally, the end consumer movement is growing, driven by a number of things we'll talk about. And to me, what's different aren't the fundamentals, but more about how they're practiced. And that's kind of what we'll cover today. Can't move the slide. Can one of you throw up the slide presentation and move it? Because this was not moving for me. Stop share.
Austin will get that for us. I think we're switching over to the handing the keys.
Might have got it.
There we go.
Okay. So sorry for the little technical difficulty. It's amazing. The guy that owns a tech company has more tech challenges than anybody. So ultimately, as Gary mentioned, it's really important for us to talk about sharing knowledge and insights, but more important, we want to invite your interaction. Always found that ultimately we're all trying to learn. And from that, by sharing your interaction, you can share your insights, but also share some of the challenges you're dealing with so that maybe we can have a healthy conversation about as a group on how to solve some of those challenges. So let me start at the top. I think customer acquisition and retention is impacted by a lot of areas in our business model. It is just not one area. So I just want to touch on a couple of these areas because I think they're important if you're really looking to tackle and improve customer retention and customer acquisition. The first is, it seems like there has been an evolving movement where the company is more involved in the process. You're seeing companies much more engaged with customers. You're seeing the companies still working with the field, but they don't have 100% reliance on the field. And the reality is companies have the resources and the expertise to get into areas especially to improve retention that maybe the field doesn't necessarily have. And I think that's something that's important to decide with whatever your company is. What role are you going to play in the retention game? I always understood that the churn in our industry tends to be pretty quick. It tends to be what I call the micro entrepreneurs, and with them go their reps or with their customers. So the more you attack that early, the more you connect them to your brand, your product, your services, your opportunity, your culture, the more successful you will likely be in improving retention. Of course, today we are seeing a huge insurgence of tech and data. In fact, we're going to cover a little bit of the data part later on in this, but where's the tech showing up? In my opinion, everywhere. On e-commerce, on mobile apps, on the architecture you build around the enterprise systems, even on modeling touch points, which is something, the journey mapping piece that I believe the DSEF is actually having a special seminar with an expert on the journey mapping coming up in February. I met with her the other day, amazing professor that has a lot to add. I think today there is a really big importance in making sure that the field understands the importance of relationships and the concept that critical mass is what builds growth and stability, and the customers are at the forefront of that. Sometimes that education is really about shifting mindset, especially if they tend to be heavy on the opportunity side, and teaching new skill sets. Today, a lot of the skills operate in digital and the social selling, and some of the more legacy companies have an older leadership group. This wasn't their expertise. In fact, the younger, the Gen Ys were the first generation to ever fully grow up with mobile and internet. So we're learning from them, but this education is really important. And the other thing that's important about the education is it creates buy-in. It creates that unity around how you grow together and how you build stability in the business. Of course, we know that the marketplace and regulatory environment is changing. In my opinion, it is changing at a speed like we've never seen in our life. Today, how consumers shop, where they shop has changed. So you have to understand the marketplace and evolve so that you can be the most productive and successful in whichever marketplace you're marketing your products and services. I had the pleasure the last 2 weeks of being part of the first DSA compliance certification course. I can tell you, I've been at this for 35 years. I believe it was the best course I've ever taken from a value standpoint. Just simply amazing. It really taught me that there's a lot going on in the regulatory environment, and that we all have to improve on this to ensure that we protect the companies and also the reputation of our industry. We're also seeing, and I think it's an important conversation to have at the company level, is what kind of company are you? Are you really looking to drive the business through the opportunity? Are you moving in the direction of what we call being more customer centric, which to me is really about building a bigger end consumer customer base? I do believe that's where the trend is. I do think there's a higher gear here. It's something I've done at various places. I call it cultural centric. Ultimately, the culture is what people want to be a part of, and the opportunity and product live within that. But if you're, depending on which direction you're going as a company, it changes how you attack customer acquisition and customer retention. Of course, with comp plans, for a lot of years, comp plans were designed to really, to me, reward the people that get overrides, not necessarily the people selling the product. Statistically, you're going to have about 80% of your people will never build a team. So what we're seeing in the comp plan is really a reallocation of commissions so that the part-timers can stay and be properly compensated for the work they put in. One of the things that I learned from Dan Jensen that kind of fits right into this is, every distributor for their entire life will ask two questions: can I do it, and is it worth it? So the retailers are looking at that. You have to teach them so that they can do it, and equally, you have to make sure that it's worth it for them and they're properly compensated, although there is much more to the cultural addiction game than just money and movement. And finally, the analytics. I would venture to say our industry has historically been more intuition based than data driven. Today, we're finding a huge increase in analytics, not just macro analytics, but really all the way down to the touch points. So very specific and driving more decisions. And I would say analytics to me either confirm what you believe or teach you something different. So to me, they have value either way. Just to kind of keep it simple, I tend to talk about engagement in the context of this model. Maybe it's just because I can't understand anything more complicated than this, but ultimately, if you think about it, I call it the tub, faucet, tub, and culture, or faucet, tub, and drain. So if you kind of look at this, you understand that prospecting and recruiting is how we drive our business. And it varies depending on whether a company is more opportunity centric or more customer centric and how they go about doing this. But ultimately, the strength of the business, the stability of the business, the scalability of the business is all tied to the relationship game, which I call the tub. So whether you're dealing with distributor engagement, looking for how long can you keep them, at what level do they participate, or looking at customer engagement and how to improve retention, to me, this is the foundation of a healthy, solid business. And we're going to talk a fair amount about the engagement process. This is so important. But I also think probably the biggest missed opportunity on the customer side is the lost relationships. I just want to share you two really important examples that can kind of demonstrate this. I talked to one of the CEOs of $1 billion company, and we talked about the disengagement piece and the drain, as I call it. And she made a point of telling me almost 40% of their sales were coming by re-engaging customers and distributors. So I think it's important to, as a company, if you really want to look at growing, especially as a legacy company, my guess is the biggest list you have are the people that have left. And within that are not only the opportunity to re-engage people, but also the ability to resystemize your business. You can use something as simple as a net promoter score with people that will help you identify their experience, and you can pretty much re-engage people that had a decent experience and learn from people that didn't. So, I often talk in terms of this model. Roxana, do you have anything to add to this slide?
Yeah, I'd love to. Gordon, I think that this is the perfect way to really describe the 3 core elements your business must always have a pulse on. So, and what this is really visually showing you is that your sales strategy should include strategies that address these 3 populations and not just focus on one population, because if you do so, those strategies will be really reactive and not really focused on that present and future growth. So the question you'd want to ask yourself is, does the business model, or does our business model align with the future growth? So, and do you have the right strategies in place to ensure that the spike of enrollments that we've seen in 2020 will be maintained in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it's interesting on the strategy side of things, just to give you an example of how important that can be. I worked with a company that was having a really high fallout of customers. And we did a huge qualitative study, and found out that there were 2 reasons. One was, it was a nutritional company. One was they were putting the product in a cupboard or a cabinet and sort of out of sight, out of mind. And all we had to do was teach a landing zone strategy of, look, wherever you put your purse or your keys, put your product beside your toothbrush, whatever that might be. What happens then is it stays in front of them. And took it one step farther. If you think about what builds relationships and engagement, a lot of it has to do with habits. And a lot of times we talk about the use of a product, but we don't necessarily talk about tying it to an existing habit. So we understood that it's much easier to tie it to an existing habit than it is to create a new one, because ultimately habits are pretty simple. There's a trigger, somebody wants a reward, and there's a routine. So if you change the routine, you can actually do a lot with learning and re-engaging customers. So this to me is kind of the meat of the game, and it has to do with engagement. And I'm a behavioralist by nature. I've been studying behavior for probably 30 plus years now. And in my travels, I came up with, I think, is the perfect simple behavioral formula that describes engagement. So I don't care whether that engagement is a customer or a distributor or even a personal relationship. And the formula was the triumph of hope over experience. So from a behavioral standpoint, it basically says, if we're having good experiences, we don't necessarily have to lean on hope. But what happens when we're not is hope is that capital that keeps people engaged. And it always brings up an interesting question. And that question is, which one is more important? And I've always said the strength of our industry, one of the strengths of our industry is hope marketing. My gosh, can we create hope around our products and around our opportunity, around our industry? And most people that I ask that question to would say it's absolutely hope. But here's the thing you have to understand. Hope is just your belief system about the future. Where does it come from? From the experiences. So really, if you want the hope card to work, then you have to focus on the experience game. So always look at what is the belief system, because that belief system also creates expectations. So a lot of the customer retention game is tied to the expectations that happen on the acquisition side. So if you kind of, for instance, go in with these crazy marketing stories, how your product's going to drop 30 pounds in a day, all this kind of stuff, it might excite somebody, but you have to ask yourself, are you creating realistic expectations? My father used to always tell me the foundation of all disappointment is unfulfilled expectations. So I think on the acquisition thing, you have to recognize the importance of setting realistic expectations if you want to have a journey work. And then ultimately, remember this, discipline for every individual is a function of what's important to the individual. So if taking your product or your service is important, you'll find that retention is really easy. Equally the same with the opportunity. So what do we look to do? In our communication and our education, it's to increase one's belief that a product or an opportunity or a culture can basically fulfill their needs better than anything else. And that's what really drives a lot of the relationship process. So I'm going to turn it over to Roxanne. She is in the execution game. She's the experience master, so I'll let her handle this part.
All right, perfect. Yes, mastering the experience game is what your consumers expect when they interact with your brand. So companies should understand that increasing your retention rate is contingent on the consumer's experience. The better the experience and interactions your consumers have with the brand, the more loyal your consumers will be to it. Also, the more engagement a company seeks from a consumer, the more they'll feel a part of something bigger. Therefore, really understanding that retention is impacted through the experience, but also the quality of that engagement and interaction. So quality engagements have these core elements, and they're outlined here on this slide. It's the element that it's a positive interaction. It's meaningful. It creates hope, but it's also confirming and delivering on that hope. It's delivering on those expectations. It's magnifying a consumer's core beliefs. It's the relationship that's based on a value add versus trying to control, because we see so many times that companies are so afraid to lose you that they're so controlling of a consumer's purchase interaction. They're so controlling of that interaction. And having a pure and selfless connection is only going to build trust, care. And if you're always there willing to help, it's just going to enhance that connection and relationship even more. And lastly, creating, as you stated before, Gordon, that culture. It's a culture that you must be a part of, that you aspire to be, and that you just can't get enough of. That's really what's going to create your brand enthusiasts.
Gordon, I think you're on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think that's great information. Just want to touch on a couple things. Meaningful in an execution world is really about two things. It's about emotion and repetition. And the reason that is important is because our brain treats it differently. It becomes part of the subconscious, the autopilot. So when you're really working on experience, it's how do I make the experience so emotionally positive and powerful that it takes a different meaning in terms of what positive feels like to the brain. And how do I continue to fuel repetition to create the belief system and the values that I need to be successful? The other thing is there's an old adage in behavior that hope is a beggar. And what that means is ultimately every expectation, somebody expects to be fulfilled for however they measure it. So I always tell people, you have to not just understand the expectation, but how they measure it. If you kind of take the simplest thing, weight loss could be an expectation, but for one person, that might be a pound a week. For somebody else, it might be a pound a day. So these are really important things to understand to confirm hope. And I think this is an area that our industry can really gain a lot from. And I think this is what the movement, the evolutionary movement is. We're really focused on confirming hope. We're really focused on the relationship piece of things, and especially with our consumers. The magnification of hope really goes down to cultural addiction. So what's bigger than hope? Faith. Why is faith bigger? Because faith can't be defeated by an experience. So ultimately, if you want to tie somebody into your culture, what you try to do is to tie their identity into the culture so that whatever your mission is, whatever products they're on becomes part of who they are. And this is kind of the cultural addiction game. And just kind of the simplest way to remember it is if I can meet or exceed 3 or more people's needs in a culture, I can addict them to anything. And what we want to addict our customers to is really a positive, meaningful, great experience, and to continue that throughout the journey. If we solve that problem, everything begins to change in our favor. And I think we're actually moving pretty well in that direction. So Roxana, I'm going to let you handle the questions, and I'll pop in.
Yes.
Can I just do one thing? Sorry to interrupt you guys, but just while we do a little transition here, could I get you, Gordon, to expand your slides to full screen while Roxana jumps to those questions?
Yeah, so here we have our key macro questions, and these are questions that we advise you to really ask yourself, ask your business, and really dig into. So here, are you segmenting your customers? Do you have your core populations defined? Do you really know your audience at a person level? Segmenting your base is important as it allows you to place focus on the populations that are most important to your business, that yield the highest ROI. But it also allows you to have a more meaningful connection as you're able to create these personalized experiences for these populations. So with these key segments, how do you create or how do you enhance that experience? It's really creating that journey map. That's the key function to knowing how and where to improve on your segment's experience, on their journey. And you do this by laying out all of those critical touch points and enhancing ultimately their overall experience, especially those new enrollments in their first 120 days, as those are the ones that you are at highest risk of losing. Gordon, you have a lot of experience in this area, so I would love to hear your thoughts on journey mapping and segmenting.
I think journey mapping is one of the most underutilized parts of direct selling. I think when you really sit down and you look at the times where people experience your product, everything from when they order to when it arrives to communicating them in between, and you map those touch points, and you, as Roxana said, you look at how do I increase the experience here? What are the strategies, and how am I going to measure the success of that? Because to me, what you expect, you have to inspect. So measurement is really critical. To your point, the data certainly supports that if you can solve the first 120 days, it's probably going to have a profound impact on journey mapping. And I guess the new part of it, something that I'm learning now, is what they call empathy mapping, which is much more of a behavioral mapping model. So I'm excited to start utilizing that a little bit more too.
Awesome. Yes, and for your e-commerce strategies, your strategies should really focus on both the impulsive purchasing as well as those monthly orders. And brands who provide a strong monetary value on both shouldn't worry about one cannibalizing the other.
Yeah,
Gordon.
and yeah, the thing I would add with e-commerce is today, so much of it is driven by UX UI. It's how do you create the best experience you can when somebody comes to your website. And there's all kinds of strategies you can tie to that. For instance, you can make a significant improvement on customer buying simply by looking at cart abandonment and putting in a couple simple strategies to solve that. I mean, I've seen success where people can increase the amount of people that buy by 15% just by simple strategies around cart abandonment. I also think it's important to pay attention from a compliance standpoint to what is on your website. I learned last week there's actually, the FTC has what they call .com guidelines. Might be worth reviewing that so you make sure you stay compliant. But ultimately, a large percentage of sales will continue to go through e-commerce sites. The digital transformation study showed that 84% of the member companies that were surveyed have a transactional site. So people are buying through your e-commerce site. So it's important to get that piece right.
And then when it comes to educating the field, it's really important for companies to lead out on the importance of the end consumer, just as we've stated before. Really reach their field to really care about, really teach their field to really care about their relationships that they are creating, and training on how to properly follow up and maintain their business. Gordon, how can companies train to properly sell their products or services?
That's a great question. And there's a lot to it. I think to me, everything starts with mindset. So I think it is critically important for your field to understand the value of a growing end consumer base and what that means to the stability of their business and the growth of their business long term. Actually have done a number of studies on sort of the analytics tied to this. And if you don't have buy-in to the concept, if you have a competing interest, like I can give you an example of something I'm dealing with right now. I have a leader in a company I'm working with, and he believes that recruiting solves all problems. And because of that, everything is tied to money and movement and all the things that you would expect with that. But as that's taken hold, what it's done is hinder the customer experience. So I think it's really important for there to be alignment on the importance of a field person. And then the other piece is that social and digital is where it's happening these days. You've got to have tools and education to help people gain skill sets to be more successful in that area.
Couldn't agree more. And I really feel like that falls right in line with that part-time income. So how fast does your comp plan put dollars into pockets? Does it provide value to part-time users and earners? Is it restrictive? It's important to really look at your lower level builders and see if they feel recognized and rewarded for the time that they put into their business. As the more that they see, ultimately, the more they'll want to put in.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to this. I did a business intelligence study for a company taking Dan Jensen's information, which he calls the golden handcuffs. How much money does somebody have to make to stay in the game? And it was basically in the US, it ranges from $300 to $500. So I looked into the marketing plan to see where did it hit this. And it was actually the fourth level of the marketing plan, and a very, very low percentage of people got there. But what was interesting, it wasn't the average, it was the central tendency. It was actually bimodal. So you had on the lower end, as many people making less than 300, less than 100, as you did people making over 800. And this was the amazing thing. We dug into why. It was really simple. The people that had a stable income kept a customer base and had a small amount of people doing the same. So it was just building off of those fundamentals that allowed this meaningful part-time income to be created and to have that relationship piece increase.
Absolutely. And then lastly, before we get to that, the company's role in customer acquisition and retention. It's really important to understand and to really drive that your company has a role in both. And it's really important to be working alongside, aligning, and supporting your field in those efforts. There's a lot of times where we just assume the field is going to do it for us, and it's important that we support and assist them in that effort.
Yeah, totally agree.
And then lastly here, does your company re-engage your inactive or lost customers and builders? Gordon, you mentioned that this could be a gold mine for some companies, especially for those legacy companies. And in my experience, I haven't seen that this is, that it's looked at or that there are strategies around how to re-engage, and it's the lowest hanging fruit. So what's important to realize with this audience, your inactive audience, is that it costs significantly less to re-engage them before they're gone. So really looking at those at-risk groups is going to be key. And with the right promotional marketing and nurture campaigns, you can win them back and create new activity and new growth for your business.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing to this. For any of you that are not using a net promoter score, for people that have left, you might want to engage with that. And in its simplest form, it has 3 ratings, sort of like a 9 to 10, a 7 to 8, and a 5 to 6 kind of thing. It just says, here's the number. And then there's an open box that says, share your feedback or your insights. What's interesting about that, and I always say people leave, they're either brand evangelist, brand neutral, or brand terrorist. And ultimately, of course, you don't want to have brand terrorists out in the marketplace because they seem to like to tell everybody their side of the story. So with a net promoter score, you can identify with those higher ones, the neutral and the brand evangelist, that they actually are easy to get back in, because it's probably either they drifted because of something in life, or maybe there was some experience, but they're the easiest ones to recover. But at the same token, the bottom ones are what you use to resystemize your business, to really see that world from the perspective and the eyes of your customer. So it's a great little way to go about this. And of course, it takes a little bit of work. It's qualitative in nature. Certainly need to identify when they leave. The sooner you get to them, the better, but it's such an important area. So I know we're kind of running late on time, so I'm going to run through this piece really quick. I think there are some macro analytics that are a must. The first is customer lifetime sales. The other one that's missing off here for some reason is customer lifetime value. Both are important. There's always a debate. I've had this with people in the field that if the customer lifetime value is $500, why don't I just get the $500 up on the first order versus getting $50 a month for 10 months? And to me, those are the people that don't understand the power of a journey and how it increases belief and increases engagement. So both of these are important. Customer density, to me, is basically the number of end consumers per active distributor. And this is really important to discuss because it helps your team, and even to show them in the analytics and back offices or wherever you might have them, to show them that ultimately an increased customer density is a stability marker. And it's interesting that I've seen what I would call truly customer-centric companies basically have an 8 to 14 to 1 ratio of end consumers to distributors, where with more the opportunity centrics, that can go as low as 1 to 1. So today, I think driving customer density is really important. Roxana, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just going to say all of those key ones are going to be important to, like you said, measurement. So is what we're implementing, those retention strategies or those engagement strategies, are they actually moving the needle on these core areas? And if they aren't, you've got to go back and relook at those strategies and find ones that are going to work to change those behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. Net gain and loss. I will tell you that I have tracked this in every company I've been involved with. I always found that it correlated to sales. So when was it growing? When we were keeping more customers than when they lost? When was it the other way? When we were losing more customers than we kept? I think if you look at how do you measure that, it would be take your total customer base, how many leave in any given month. I think if you're 10% or lower, you're probably doing a good job. I have literally seen reps, not companies, as high as a 50% churn every month, which basically means you live and die by new business, which makes it really hard to scale and have stability. The point of sale, there's so much of a correlation between how much somebody spends and how long they stay. I do find that companies that start with higher end starter packs, especially if they're pushed to end consumers, likely do not have good retention. Everybody probably knows where that sweet spot is with point of sale with your preferred customers. From my research, I would say it's probably in the $50 to $70 range. If you get above that, it starts to be more difficult to retain people. And then, of course, today, data is either snapshot or trending. I always believe in trending data because I get more context behind it, and understand that a lot of the customer data is not quantitative, but qualitative. It's doing surveys and reaching out, listening to your customer, talking to your customer. This is a place where you really have to invest and understand the experience. Roxana, do you have anything you want to add to that other group?
Yeah, just want to amplify what you're saying there at the end. Understanding the why behind what is happening is only going to help you understand what to do. So if you understand why, and this is a question that just came in, is do you have an example of simple, effective re-engagement strategies? The strategy has to marry what is happening and why it's happening. And so, a great place to start is, like you said, surveys, the NPS, figure out that why, because you'll know exactly what to do and how to re-engage.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is anytime you're looking at the why, you have to look at the measurement component of it. So, because people measure things, they could say like, well, I was having fun and I'm not having fun anymore. The question is, how do you determine whether you're having fun or not? And so anytime you're looking at needs-based stuff, you always want to look at how they measure it and also where else they're looking to fulfill that need. Because I found a lot of people drift in our industry. You have people that kind of get off the product for a while, life kind of gets in the way, and then they kind of drift back in. So keeping in touch in various ways has a lot of power. So let me kind of end on this. To me, this is the foundation of everything I've done for 35 years, to understand that the distribution channel is the foundation of the direct selling industry and the opportunity. And if you kind of look at this, I call it relationship stacking. The biggest group that determines stability are your customers. And that's not just your end consumers, it's your distributors that buy also, but it definitely needs to have a more end consumer focus. If you get that part right, which is really what we're focused on in this, then you have to look at your part-timers, your micro entrepreneurs. These are typically your retailers that they're never really business builders. They're really sharers. There's a lot of things you can do to run this group. But if you can't keep them in, especially in the first 120 days, what the data will tend to tell you is when they leave, their customers leave, which goes back to why the company has to be involved so much in those 120 days to cement the relationship between the customer and the company, so that they don't leave if these micro entrepreneurs. If you can get those two right, then I think the success of the company in terms of developing leadership becomes much easier. If you don't get those right, what you end up doing is you kind of pop and drop. You'll get a leader that'll drive up. They don't have these foundations in place, and then they fall off. And trying to recover that is quite a difficult challenge. Roxana, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I feel like you've stated it all very well, very, very well.
Okay. Gary, do you have some questions?
Yeah, so I have a couple, but I want to encourage our participants, a good number of folks participating. Again, use that chat and Q&A function. We want to hear your questions. We want to see the things that you're most directly focused on and that'd be most valuable to hear from Gordon and Roxana on. But, I'm thinking if you're a company that's making this transition in focus to more attention to the customer experience, I guess I wouldn't say rather than, I guess even the balance of the focus on customer experience and distributor experience. Couple questions. What's the most important first step as you're trying to make that transition? And then you talked, Gordon, about the importance of alignment with the field in this conversation. How do you message this to your field to make clear that they're gaining something, not losing something here?
Yeah, I think everything starts with buy-in and alignment. If you don't get that and you have misalignment, then you kind of have conflict and drama on a regular basis. It's not always easy to do. I have found that the easiest way is to find those that align and to work with them. And as they succeed, the people that don't necessarily align tend to go with them. And I can give you a perfect example of that. One company that I worked with, their sales were stuck for about 6 years. Their base wasn't growing. I got engaged with a rep, built what we call a care funnel that morphed into a customer-centric business model for the company. Their sales over 4 years went from 300 million to almost 800 million. And a big part of that was that shift. But the only way it worked was I got in the field and started working with a couple people that bought into what I was saying. And then the results started creating this wildfire that just took off. So I think, to me, the buy-in is the most important part.
Gotcha. I would agree.
And the only thing I would add to that too is just the field typically is anxious to understand why. The more we can inform them and help them understand why there's a shift, whether that be with facts, whether that be with core value alignment, the more they're willing to listen and to really follow.
Gotcha. Good stuff. Another question from our friends in the audience. Where can we learn more about journey mapping? We've got a good answer for that one. And what are the common best practices and ways to segment customers?
You know, that's a great question because there's no one segmentation because it's really needs based. So I try to determine, for instance, maybe there's a group of customers that are buying into a performance line. They're not necessarily going to be the same customer base that's buying into a prevention product. So you can segment based on need. I kind of like to do things that way because the journey is different. I kind of, there's one person on here that to me, one of the, not a panelist, but I see a question by Michelle Bayon at Direct Tech Labs. His whole business has been built on building segmentations, and he's had amazing success being able to do it. If you happen to listen to Tim Sanson's presentation from Herbalife, phenomenal presentation, showed the importance of segmentation and how they executed on it and how it created 10 straight quarters of growth in their biggest month ever. So I think it's really learning. And this is kind of what I would tell anybody. If you don't know how, find somebody that does. And because they're experts in this field, Dr. Hernandez, who is going to be doing the customer mapping webinar in February. Is that right, Gary?
That's
February?
correct. Yep.
She's an expert on this. My gosh, when I was talking to her, and I've done a lot of segmentation work, but I built my own tech programs for it because there were things that I wanted to measure, you know, strategies, how we're going to measure things, who's involved. There's a whole litany of things I needed at each touch point. But when I talked to her, I felt like I took more notes than talking. And I think there's huge resources out there, especially in the academic community and equally with our vendors in the industry that can add a lot of value in this area if you don't know how. I have found over the years that the learning curve, trying to do it yourself, can be a very expensive proposition. So I tend to believe that the greatest resource is resourcefulness. So find people that can do it, plug them in and learn and get better.
Yep. Love that. Love that. So we have time for a few more questions, and I want to focus on our audience, friends in the audience. Here's one. Any tools you can recommend for user journeys? And do you recommend starting with a blank slate for user journeys or leveraging a common template? Is there a standard e-commerce journey map sort of thing?
Roxana, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say there are a lot of tools out there, and I would just suggest, even if you just did a Google search of, you know, journey mapping tools, I'm sure you could see a lot out there. I think the key to the journey map is understanding where your business's critical touch points are and who you're actually building the journey map for. So again, as Gordon stated, this is after you've done that segmentation, after you've defined your personas and those key personas, and then building out what your current journey might look like, and then building out what now the ideal journey should be. Leveraging internal data is going to be important. Leveraging a lot of collaboration within your organization. It takes a lot to build a journey. So yeah, I would say blank slate is probably the best, in my opinion, because you're going in with a different mindset. You're going in with the mindset of, I want to enhance this, I want to improve it, and I want the end customer to stay.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight something Roxana said. One of the tenets of a healthy culture is blameless and collaborative problem solving. And the journey mapping isn't something that lives in marketing. It's something that lives within the company. It requires all departments to be a part of it to maximize the experience. I remember actually at a DSA event, they had Disney come in and they talked about the wow factor and how detailed they were in mapping every journey, realizing they could do 100 things right and one bad experience could change everything. So I think it's really important to attack it as a team and to figure out where the gaps are in the experiences that are hurting the business and to really work together to identify and solve the problems at those gaps.
Gotcha. One last question, and I'm so sorry to cut this off because it's such a great discussion. And I'm glad we're having sort of this three-part series on on customer acquisition and retention. Such great information here. One of our participants is interested to know more about the Net Promoter Score. Give an example of, when do you send that, and what's the best result you've gotten from that, or the most important way to go about it?
I think it's best sent as soon as you can identify somebody disengaging, because time becomes the enemy. I think from a design standpoint, the more complicated it is, the less chance somebody will engage with it. So always use a Net Promoter Score. There's so much data on Net Promoter Scores. You can read about it. For me, it was just always simple. 3 ratings, let them write in a box what they want so that I can learn and resystemize and approach it from that standpoint.
Gotcha.
And just to add to that a little bit, is having a pulse. And I would say send that Net Promoter Score as many times. It's one question that they're rating from 0 to 10, where you're getting all of that great information of the, your promoters, your detractors, and your passives. And so I think that there's so much to be gained there. So I would say have a set cadence. So that you're constantly understanding where that disconnection is in the journey, as Gordon stated, and where your brand loyalists are starting to form.
Yeah, and I guess the one other thing I would add is, I'm a tech guy. I want to automate everything and use it to bring simplicity to the world. I'm in the middle of putting a Net Promoter Score in with the company I'm with right now, and one of the things that I encouraged from the beginning was the customer service team actually calling and talking to people. It really helped build the understanding of the importance of this. We started gathering data, and then you can sort of maneuver and restructure how you're going about things. But it's funny, even as an executive, I always made time to call and talk to an actual consumer. I think if there's one critique I have on the industry is we talk a lot to leaders, we don't really talk to the consumers and the micro entrepreneurs that are lifeblood of the business. And I think the more you move in that direction, the better it's going to be. The Net Promoter Score will help you identify where you can re-engage people. But, as I said, it's about simplicity, not hammering somebody with an 8-page survey that you just won't get a good engagement on.
Right. Well, listen, I so hate to cut this off, because what a fantastic conversation. And I think a great sign, more and more questions coming in. And I'm excited that we're able to do this today. We will continue the conversation both with Roxana and Gordon. Thank you so much. We want to keep you engaged in that conversation as we go forward. We encourage our audience to communicate with us, and we'll make connections, and we'll make Gordon and Roxana's presentation available, certainly, for anybody that would like to have that. And then I want to give a couple of quick previews, because we have something really cool to move on to. First of all, Gordon had mentioned, thank you, that Dr. Monica Hernandez, a DSEF fellow from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, an expert on customer journey mapping, will be doing a tutorial on journey mapping in February. That's our next installment in the DSEF series. And Dr. Hernandez has also sort of offered to do a follow-up if there's interest, a real hands-on workshop like we did with Steph Boyer and Sharmeen Aran on social media, branding, and the rest. So we really encourage you guys to participate on that, to build on this discussion, be a part of that one as well. We also want to mention the foundation, DSEF, is dependent and funded by voluntary contributions by the industry. We encourage you to visit our website and support our work, engage in our work. Thanks so much for the way you guys have done that as well. And then last thing, I want to remind one more time, and in the chat, there's an address for this. Joe Mariano will be making a very special announcement on Facebook Live immediately following this conversation at 2 o'clock about a very exciting direct selling journal that's being launched, a real flagship for the industry, and we're excited to get that going. So please jump over to Facebook and join us. It'll be really important and great to hear. We won't keep you much longer. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to getting together again. Gordon and Roxana, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.